Welcome to Beyond the Pod, presented by SodaStick.com.
Brunette, he moves, Brunette back in, he scores! Minnesota has upset the Colorado Avalanche! Andrew Brunette, the game-winning goal!
Here are your hosts, the second greatest scorer in Gopher hockey history, Pat Micheletti, and the second greatest hockey analyst on this podcast, Brandon Mileski.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Pod, brought to you by SodaStick.com. Brandon Mileski along with Pat Micheletti. And Pat, kind of the first time we've gotten to chat since the Wild season ended in that first round versus the St. Louis Blues. And I kind of want to spend today looking back at the past season and kind of looking ahead at the offseason. And I find myself conflicted on how to evaluate the season as a whole, Pat, because, I mean, obviously the regular season records are broken, a much more entertaining style of hockey. There's a lot to be excited about, yet we still ended up having the same result. Now, they played a good St. Louis team in the first round, but I'm conflicted as to how to evaluate a big sample size of a regular season, which was really good, with what wasn't good in a small sample size of the postseason, but that's also been something historically that this team has struggled with some of these core players.
Well, I'm glad that we didn't speak right after the elimination game, because automatically, and I was one of them. I'm guilty of it, and fans are guilty of it, and players are probably guilty of it, is we have knee-jerk reactions right away. Oh, this has got to happen. That's got to happen. He was horrible. He was great. He was hurt. All the different things. Bad goalie decision. Was it not? And so, you need time to reflect. You need time to look at things. And there's no question, it was the most entertaining season of Minnesota Wild hockey that I've witnessed in the 20 some odd years. Yes. It was fun. It was fun to watch a Thursday night when they're in Buffalo, just because of Kaprizov and not only Kaprizov, but other players on the team. It was an exciting brand. They proved that they were a top 5 team in the league. At least during the regular season, or 6 or 7 or whatever. We can, look at it any way you want, but now we move on, right? Now we have to look at it and what is best for this team going forward, and what is going to get them to that next level of winning in the first round and advancing. And so here we are.
It's kind of funny you mentioned them being, one of the top 6 or 7 teams in the league. I still look at the way the playoffs are going now and look at the Edmonton Oilers, and I go, the Minnesota Wild are better than the Edmonton Oilers. If the Wild played the Oilers in a 7-game series, I think the Wild would win. I know McDavid and Draisaitl are playing bonkers on a whole nother level, but there's a lot of flaws in that team. And, it stinks to say, hey, the Wild, it's another first-round loss, because we've seen this over and over and over again. Yet, in my opinion, they were still a top 3 team in the West. Yeah,
and guess what? We're going to see this for the next foreseeable future. 5.
Yeah.
We just are, and so that being said, what are you going to do to be one of those teams that is on the winning side of it? And so, listen, what we know about Bill Guerin is that he's not here to please the fans and their favorite players. He will do anything, I think, to get, and that's why I and I know we're going to get to it, but the whole Fiala Dumba conversation and which one is going to go. And I'm in the camp of, even though it may sound crazy, that maybe both of them end up being back here, and someone we didn't expect to goes. We don't know. I at least, I know our good friend Michael Russo has, and he'll probably end up being right. He probably has that information. But until something happens, nothing would shock me.
Well,
Nothing would shock me.
who would go though? Because the players you would then have to clear salary for, like a Zuccarello or a Spurgeon, these guys have no move clauses. So I don't know how it's really possible to be able to keep both of them, unless you're going to ask someone to waive their no move, which
right. And I look at it, and if I was a player, okay, and I have a no move contract, and the GM comes to me and says, well, here's the deal. This team really wants you bad. We like what they're offering. I would look at it as like, well, boy, this team doesn't value me anymore, or has the ability to move me. Do I really want to be here? And so I would say, okay, I'll waive it. They really want me bad. Apparently you guys don't anymore. I'll waive it. Now, that's me. That may not be Jared Spurgeon or whoever else has no move contracts, but I just don't think it's a deal breaker. Now, whether that happens or not, or it's even it may be so preposterous that names like that would even be brought up, that it may be just a moot point. But I guess my whole point is, knowing Bill Guerin, his unpredictability.
Sure.
It's hard to say that possibly wouldn't happen.
He does have some unpredictability, but I just the way he's constrained by the salary cap, right? There's only so much he can do. And frankly, Pat, you and I, we can have a discussion all day long about Fiala or Dumba, and we have.
Yep.
We've discussed that all season long. If money was not a factor, I would want to keep Kevin Fiala over Matt Dumba. Yep. Now, I don't know what Fiala is asking for. That being said, Bill Guerin has basically told everyone in the Twin Cities, Kevin Fiala is gone.
It's gone.
So, I mean, he's he's not hiding anything here.
No.
What I find potentially could find interesting, Pat, is could both of them be gone? Right?
Yeah.
I think the one argument for keeping Dumba over Fiala is Dumba's got 1 year on his contract, so now you've got flexibility after his contract's over, right? Whereas if you lock down Fiala for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, like, you're kind of stuck in terms of big contracts you're able to move, and that's your core moving forward. Whereas if you let go of, if you trade Fiala, get some picks, maybe get a first round pick, you still have that $6 million from Dumba off the books the following year. That gives you a little bit more flexibility. So I'm convinced Fiala is gone. That's 99.5% chance that he is gone this offseason. He'll be traded. The more interesting decision, I think, is what do you do with Dumba? Because he's 1 year removed. He's 1 year removed from free agency. He'd want to stay here. Bill Guerin is saying all the nicest things in the world about him. How much of that is sincere? How much of that is maybe he's blowing smoke, trying to create more of a trade market from him? But, do you let Dumba play out the last year of his deal? Do you sign him to an extension? I'm not really super excited, given you're paying Spurgeon and Brodin what you are, and you'd like to probably keep Middleton around for a while. I'm not all in on extending Dumba this offseason unless it's the most team-friendly deal in the history of the world.
Well, that's that, and you bring up a good point on the trade value. If I'm a team that would be willing to trade for Matt Dumba, I know he's got 1 year left on his deal, right? Yep. I could say, you know what? I'm not going to give up the farm for a guy who's only got 1 year unless there's permission given to extend him with the new team and all of that. And, that's a lot of moving parts, but the trade value, I think, for Kevin Fiala would be a lot more, in my opinion.
But he also is going to have a contract in place.
But now that I'm just thinking that, yes, he's going to have a new contract. And what's that going to look like? Well, then you look at what teams are available to trade him, to trade for him, right? What team has enough money and are willing to go the length that he's going to want. Because he's probably, I don't know, I'm guessing in the 7 to 8 million range, 8 maybe a little high. But you'll look at his numbers and you'll say, well, 85 points, that's what everyone, that's what some of these guys are getting. I really don't know.
See, I'm with you. Like, if he was 7 to 8, I would pay him that.
Yeah.
I think he's going to get more than that, which is why it gets to a point where, all right, I like Kevin Fiala, but there's a certain extent, there's a point where I don't want to get to with him where, well, I like him, but I don't know if I like him that much.
Right. Right.
Where it's then hard to keep him.
Because you have to control your cap, and teams, try to maneuver and manipulate and this and that. And, I think Guerin said, I still like the move of the buyouts. They're free and clear. They're going to get through this 3 years of hell, if that's what we want to call it, of salary cap issues. And then, try to create some stability within the organization that may affect how they are on the ice. But I just think some owners are so, I don't know what the word is, just chaotic with their spending and not being able to control their cap. They get in trouble.
Yeah. I want you to then talk about the Dumba side of this, about what you envision for him and his future moving forward, because he's clearly a solid top 4 defenseman. I don't think offensively, ever since he started getting these shoulder and upper body injuries, he just hasn't been the same offensively that he once was, or at least not necessarily what he once was, but what we once projected him to be. Probably ended up being a little bit better defensively. But Pat, my concern watching the playoffs, I love Jared Spurgeon. I love Jonas Brodin, but we've now had, a pretty good run here of, maybe this style of defense. I think you can get away with 1 or 2 of this style of defenseman, but when you have a Dumba who's not the biggest guy in the world and a Goligoski who's not the biggest guy in the world, like, at some point we kind of need some beef. And I know they tried to address that with Middleton, but I just don't know if this overall smallish defenseman style is going to work for this team in the postseason. And Spurgeon's having surgery. I mean, he's getting older. He's going to get hurt more as he ages here. And I know Brodin is not super small, but he doesn't play big. At what point is this style overall not going to work? And do we, and people want Kalen Addison, and it's like, well, I don't know if we can have another smallish guy in this core. We have too many small guys.
No, I agree 100%. And it works during the regular season because guys aren't going 100 miles an hour every shift, and you're not getting lit up, or blown up, or whatever term you want to use, every single shift. And you can get away with that. But look in the playoffs. I mean, it is absolutely, it's hard. It's hard on these guys, and their bodies can't hold up. And it makes a big difference, especially, teams are getting bigger up front too. These guys are they're faster, they're bigger, and they're stronger, and they attack you quicker. And it is so difficult on some of these guys. Now, Matt is a guy that plays hard. He plays bigger than he tries to play like a 6'4", 220 pounder, and he's not. Yep. And for those reasons, he gets injured. And I tell you, Brandon, the time of, if you look at the NHL player now, every one of them, even the bigger guys, there's not a lot of beef on them. They're all sleek. They're all slender. And I think that plays a big part of their injury problems. We're seeing more core injuries. We're seeing more shoulder injuries. And so the bulk player is not there anymore. And, and to go and get hit or hit other people, I think it really leads to what we're seeing is a lot more injuries. And Matt's been, a victim of that. And so, is he going to change his game? I doubt it. But there's always a risk going forward of more injuries, and more injuries, especially as he gets older. And so, you bring up Addison. Where's he going to play on this team? I mean, he may be NHL ready, and he may be able to play for somebody. He's good enough to play in the NHL. But do you want that back on your D-corp? I don't think you do. And that's why I said it a couple months ago. It would not shock me if he's involved in some type of deal this summer.
And you mentioned the Dumba injury. Dumba's injury this year was him delivering a check.
Yes.
It wasn't one where you're on the receiving end of a hit and you're not expecting it, or you weren't braced for it, or you didn't have the leverage. He was the one delivering the hit. So
yeah,
absolutely.
Brandon,
bizarre.
you've seen him in person.
Yeah.
And it's like, really, you you play in the NHL. That body. I mean, I don't know how he does it, but you know what? They like him. He's a good player. He plays hard.
Yep.
He's a good team guy. And the fifth thing is he wants to be here. So when you want a team that want a team that you want guys to be there and be a part of something, that's pretty important.
But to my previous point, eventually, I think this team just needs more size back on the blue line.
To your point,
and Brodian and Spurgeon aren't going anywhere. So I just think it's in the Wild's best interest. Not that Dumba can't be on the team next year. Not that you have to trade him this offseason, but I would not extend him for anywhere close to what he's making right now.
That's a lot of money.
I would not be committed to that unless he's willing to take a decent pay reduction.
Come down a little bit, right? I mean, just come down a little bit, and and that'll be the big point to him. You really want to be here. You really want to be part of this. Here's how we're going to get there, and it's easier said than done. That's for sure.
All right, I want to talk to you about the eventual departure of Kevin Fiala and the effects that'll leave on the team. But first, I want to let our listeners and viewers know about our sponsor on Beyond the Pod. That would be sodastick.com. Go to sodastick.com to get your original Minnesota sports inspired goods. If you haven't seen the stuff yet, you got to check it out. One of my favorite designs I'm currently wearing on my head at this moment. All of their apparel screen printed here in Minnesota on super soft, super comfy shirts. You're going to love it, and we'll hook you up with 15% off your next order. So use the code KFAN for 15% off. That is sodastick.com. Original Minnesota sports inspired goods. Use the code KFAN for 15% off your next order. All right, let's talk about the eventual departure of Kevin Fiala, which is going to happen, I believe, at some point this offseason. What does this mean? Let's first start with Matt Boldy, who once he was called up and they played together for quite some time, obviously there was some chemistry. Didn't really work out in the playoffs. But Matt Boldy, do you think not having a Fiala on his line next season will have any impact on what he can produce offensively?
I don't. I think he's going to be a superstar. I really do. I watched him obviously all year, right? And then I watched him in the World Championships, and he was great. He was great. He played on a line with Hartman, and it wouldn't shock me to see him. And he played. You know who he played on a line with? Hartman, and guess who was on the other side? Alex Galchenyuk.
Ooh.
And that line was really, really good. And, and I know there's, I want to talk about Galchenyuk for a second. I just can't figure that guy out. Honestly,
I wasn't expecting us to talk about Alex Galchenyuk today on the podcast.
No, honestly, though, and it's a different game over there. I get it. But man, is he skilled. He is so skilled.
He's skilled.
And to me, it's a matter of want for him. Does he want it enough? Obviously, they didn't think he did. And obviously, in places that he's been, they've seen probably the same thing. He had the one good year in Montreal where he scored, 20-something. But it's too bad a talent like that gets wasted. Okay, I'll move on. It wouldn't shock me to see a Hartman and Boldy put together next year at all. And that would be fine with me. I think this team really, really needs an upgrade at center. They need a centerman. I've been on this kick, and I know Dean Evison loves him. This is just my opinion. I don't think he's playoff built. Watching some of the centers and how they play in the playoffs and how hard it is with some of these bigger defensemen, I just think, I look at Ryan O'Reilly, right?
Were you talking about Frederick Gaudreau?
I'm talking about Freddie Gaudreau.
Okay.
And not that he shouldn't be on this team, but I don't think he's a number one or a number two center. I just don't. And I think you need to really, if you're going to get rid of Fiala, I think you need to bring in a centerman that can play with Zuccarello and Kaprizov, put Hartman and Boldy together and fill that, that wing position. Maybe it's Dewar, maybe it's Duhaime. I don't know, whatever. But I really think if Fiala goes, you've got to find a centerman.
All right. Well, let's move on to the next topic then. You've seen Marco Rossi a decent amount down in Iowa. One, is he ready to be a full-time National Hockey League player? And then two, how do you handle him moving forward? Because you just suggested, and I agree with you, maybe moving Ryan Hartman away from Zuccarello and Kaprizov and trying to find a number one center. Is he someone at his age that you try to throw with your two best skill players right off the bat? Do you try to ease him in, and maybe is that too much pressure for a guy like that? Your overall thoughts on Rossi and what he can bring next year?
Well, I'm going to throw this at you, and this is nothing against Marco Rossi. I think his size is going to be a factor for him. I really do, because if you don't have, he's a really good passer, but if you don't have the size, in my opinion, if you don't have something, if you're lacking size and you don't have that Johnny Gaudreau type flair, if you don't have something that's really gonna
Patrick Kane and
apart, some pizzazz, something, you become predictable, in my opinion. I don't think he's ready for a number one or a number two spot. If he stays here, he'll be on the team. There's no question about it. But it wouldn't shock me. Again, this is me. It wouldn't shock me if someone says, you know what? Yeah, we like him on our team. It wouldn't. Let's put him in the mix for a potential trade. If you're looking to get a number one center or a number two center. So I just, yes, he will be on this team if they don't move him, but I don't think he's a number one or two.
I have a hard time believing they're going to move him, Pat, just because from the way their salary cap is set up, they need guys making Marco Rossi money to be able to contribute at an NHL level over the next couple of years. So it'd be hard for me to believe that they would, because if you're moving them, you want to bring a number one, two, or number one or number two center. You're now bringing in salary, and most likely, and I don't know. I think it's kind of dicey unless you're moving them a part of the Fiala deal. But but to your point, Pat, how about we're talking about the current players that we project to be on the team. You and I know the power play was a big letdown. It's been let down for a couple of years. It was a letdown in the playoffs, probably the biggest reason they lost. And to improve on that, I just don't know if you can just X's and O's your way out of this, Pat. Maybe you're probably more of a power play expert than I am, so you might be able to come up with certain things from a strategic standpoint that they can improve on. But I still think it comes down to they've never had that right-hand shot on the weak side with all your left-handed players, and they've never had the big shot from the point. And you kind of got to go outside the organization to fix one or both of those holes.
These teams are so good at breaking down power plays and defending them. I think Minnesota became too predictable. We saw Zuccarello and Kaprizov, and those are the drivers of the power play, right? And more often than not, it was one of them setting each other up. Well, we knew they were going to be behind the net. We knew they were going to make that pass. I just think they were too predictable of a power play, and that's got to be addressed. Whether it be through X's and O's or getting that, what you mentioned, that right-handed shot over there. I don't know how you fix it. I really don't. Because those guys are skilled enough, right? I mean,
Yes.
they're 100-point guys or whatever. And so, but it just has become too predictable, in my opinion. And relying on one or two guys, you need three guys, you need four guys, you need everyone participating and being an option. And I don't think that was there. I think their options were limited.
All right, let's talk about everyone's favorite topic from the postseason, the goaltending situation when they acquired Marc-Andre Fleury and decided to start him through five of the first 6 games of the series. I think Bill Guerin's made it pretty obvious he wants Marc-Andre Fleury back. I would think Fleury wants to be back. Cam Talbot is under contract for 1 more year. How do you think the goalie situation is going to look next year? You think both of them are going to be here? Do you think for some reason Fleury doesn't sign? Do you think Talbot wants to get out of here? What will our goaltending situation look like after this offseason is over?
Well, again, let's get through next season because Wallsted's coming, right? So is Fleury going to accept $3 million? If he accepts $3 million, and you bring him back as a tandem, that's fine. I think Cam Talbot will be back. I think things can get blown up a little bit. We saw all the social media stuff, and Cam had a great year, and he's a really, really good goaltender. So I don't know. I just, my hope is that Wallstead doesn't have to be Shesterkin or doesn't have to be Vasilevsky, but is that guy, that you got in the first round that people seem to think that he can be really, really good. And, he'll probably spend the year in Iowa, maybe get a couple games up here next year, but I'm looking forward to year 2. And hopefully they can get through next year.
He's by far the best goalie prospect they've ever had, right? I'm trying to think of, we've never really had like that young goalie in waiting. I mean, you've had like Josh Harding and even Darcy Kemper, but you never were like convinced those guys were going to be the guy, right? Whereas Wallstead, now my only thing with Wallstead is everyone keeps throwing his name out. He was just drafted last yeyear. And goalies typically take a lot longer to develop than position players. I know you're Shesterkin's kind of a different. He's the exception to the rule. So I just hope people are patient with Wallstead, and if next year he's not tearing up the AHL, or if we don't see him playing for the Wild for another 2-3 years, like we need to slow down a little bit and tap the brakes with him.
Yeah, and my intel on Wallstead, and it's through a very good source, like a guy I played with who won a Stanley Cup with the Edmonton Oilers, backed up Grant Fuhr, ended up going over to Europe to play. He's now a color commentator in the Swedish Elite League. And I asked him, give me the lowdown on Wallstead. He said, you're going to love him. He'll need a year to get used to the North American rinks, but he is the real deal. I would take his thoughts on that and feel good because he's watched a guy all season long and really thinks that Minnesota got a good one on him.
One non-Wild topic, though, it's a team they just played in the first round of the playoffs, the St. Louis Blues. They've got some interesting decisions coming up this offseason as well, with David Perron's a free agent. You've got Husso, they got to pay. Tarasenko and Ryan O'Reilly are both 1 year away from free agency. They're not going to be able to re-sign Nick Leddy, I don't think, with where they are against the cap. So there could be some interesting decisions in St. Louis as well.
Very much so. All have indicated that they want to return. Well, of course they all want to return, right? Yeah. But is there, then like Minnesota, some guys are going to have to take probably a cut because, they were pretty close to being at the cap. And so, Ryan O'Reilly, I'm sure would love to end his career there. and he seems like a guy that understands where his game is at and what he can provide offensively. I don't think they want to lose him just because of his leadership and his will to win and knowing how to win. Tarasenko, as indicated, he wants to come back. Well, he wasn't real happy with what they were offering and so forth and so on. And they said, fine, talk to other teams, see if they'll trade for you. I think they've mended that fence a little bit. But, again, he's going to have to be, a lot of those guys that you brought up are going to, have to, David Perron, another guy.
And Jordan Kyrou eventually is going to get a pretty significant raise.
Going to have to get paid at some point.
Yeah.
They have a lot of guys that are in that category. So Minnesota's not the only team that has some things to deal with.
When are McCarr and McKinnon going to get their big deals? Or McCarr already did, right? But McKinnon has been getting a pretty reasonable deal for quite some time, and eventually he's going to get paid a lot of money.
He's going to get what that, and that's why,
because he's been making 6.5.
The pressure to win in Colorado is that window is closing because they can't keep. They're going to probably lose Kadri this summer because he's a free agent, I believe. Yes, he is a free agent this summer.
Yeah,
he
is.
And he had 90 points, 85 points, something like that, like Kevin Fiala. How are you going to keep him?
And McKinnon's got one more year at $6.3 million, so he is going to get a boatload of cash, I would believe, this offseason.
Million.
Yeah,
and rightly so. And Kadri's going to want, and then Rantanen. I mean, you get to a point where, okay, this is it, guys, because guess what? We have to lose. I mean, we can't afford it, and so
they're going to have three guys over $9 million.
Right. And, it's just going to be, it's going to be impossible to do because the cap's only going up, $1 million, it's only going up $1 million this year.
Yeah.
And you gotta, factor that in. And it doesn't look like, with the way things are, that it's going to go up all that much. It's not going to go up 5 or 6 million in one season. So it's going to make it difficult on a lot of teams.
All right, Patrick, it's time to end the podcast like we always do. Do you have any stick taps?
Do I have any stick taps? Well, I had one for you, Brandon. If you have one first, I'll let you go first.
Sure, I'll go first. I'm actually going to give a stick tap to some superstars in the National Hockey League, and that would be Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, two guys, specifically McDavid, that have taken a lot of heat over the years with the Oilers not making the playoffs, or when they do, they don't make extended runs. And those two are single-handedly carrying that Oilers team on their backs with, some of the worst goaltending I've seen, and they're poorest defensively. That team needs to score 6 goals a game to win in the playoffs, which is not easy to do. And those two have been doing it right now. Going into last night's game 1, which ended up being 8-6 Colorado, McDavid and Draisaitl both had 26 points each in 12 games in the postseason, which is really unheard of. So I'll give my stick taps to the two big guys in Edmonton.
Well, I'll go that route too, and I'll go with the New York Rangers and Igor Shesterkin because this is a team that I thought was a year away from making any type of run, and they probably do not make the playoffs without Igor Shesterkin. He stole games all season long, and he has stolen them in the playoffs. And it's been a story that probably doesn't get talked about as much as McDavid and McKinnon in the West, right? Because of how great of players they are. But this guy has been absolutely phenomenal, and it'll be fun to watch this series. Him going up against the probably the best goalie in the world, and Andre Vasilevsky.
I was just going to bring that up. That Shesterkin's been great, but the Rangers have gotten pretty lucky in the postseason where they haven't had to face like a starting goalie for both. Pittsburgh had goalie issues.
Yes, 4 AHL goaltenders that they have faced, and you and I have talked about it a lot. You need a good power play. You need good goaltending. You need guys on the same page and believing, but you need luck. and they've yes, they won, and give them credit, but they drew a nice hand too.
They're just going from poor goaltending to Vasilevsky, so we'll see how they.
Right.
To me, Shesterkin, you just mentioned, he's going to have to steal that series for the Rangers.
I agree 100%.
All right, thank you, Patrick.
Thanks, Brandon. Have a great.
All right, he's Pat Micheletti. I'm Brandon Mileski. This has been yet another episode of Beyond the Pod. As always, it is brought to you by SodaStick.com. We'll be back next week right here on Beyond the Pod. Thanks for listening and for watching on the KFN YouTube channel. Bye.